If you care about real history, the kind that actually kept people alive, make sure you subscribe now, because this channel exists to preserve knowledge most documentaries skip. Today, we're talking about an insulator so effective during World War II that it routinely outperformed blankets, coats, and even early sleeping bags. Yet almost nobody talks about it anymore. This isn't trivia. This is survival history with direct relevance to anyone interested in cold weather endurance, preparedness, and material science under pressure. Why cold killed more soldiers than bullets in many theatres of war. Before we get into the material itself, it's important to understand the problem World War II armies faced. Hypothermia, frostbite, trench foot and exposure quietly crippled entire units, especially on the Eastern Front, in the Alps, and during long winter campaigns. Blankets were heavy, slow to dry, and lost most of their insulating value when damp. Wool coats helped, but wind stripped heat faster than layers could trap it. Militaries needed something lightweight, water-resistant, and effective, even when conditions were miserable. The material was Kapok, and it changed how insulation worked in wartime. Kapok is a natural fibre harvested from the seed pods of the kapok tree, primarily grown in Southeast Asia. What made Kapok extraordinary was its hollow fibre structure. Each fibre trapped air inside itself, not just between layers like wool or cotton. This meant superior insulation at a fraction of the weight. Pound for pound, Kapok could outperform thick wool blankets, especially in damp or windy conditions, which was critical for soldiers sleeping outdoors, in trenches, or in unheated shelters. Blankets rely on loft created by thickness. Compress them or get them wet, and the insulation collapses. Kapok fibres resisted water naturally because they're coated in a waxy substance. Even when exposed to moisture, Kapok retained buoyancy and insulation. This is why it was widely used in World War II life jackets, cold weather liners and flight gear. Air trapped inside the fibres meant warmth stayed close to the body, not blown away by wind or drained by humidity. And, you know, that's how soldiers actually use Kapok in the field. Kapok wasn't just sewn into jackets. It appeared in sleeping rolls, aircraft seat padding, insulated boots, and emergency bivouac liners. Pilots flying at high altitude depended on Kapok-filled suits to survive freezing cockpit temperatures. Naval crews relied on Kapok life vests, not only for flotation, but for thermal protection in cold water. In many cases, soldiers layered Kapok-lined garments under standard uniforms, effectively creating a thermal barrier that weighed far less than extra blankets. Why did this insulator disappear from mainstream use after the war? Well, after the Second World War, synthetic insulators like polyester batting and later on fleece became cheaper and easier to mass-produce. Kapok harvesting was honestly pretty labour-intensive, and post-war supply chains just favoured petrochemical materials. Over time, Kapok was rebranded as outdated, even though it had properties that modern synthetics still struggle to match. The irony is that today's so-called high-tech insulation often mimics what Kapok did naturally 80 years ago. So, what can modern survivalists and preppers actually learn from Kapok today? Well, the key lesson isn't really about hunting down those old vintage Kapok jackets, though, they do still exist out there. The real takeaway is about understanding the principles of insulation. It's the air trapped inside the fibres that does most of the work, not just the thickness of the material. And honestly, water resistance is every bit as critical as warmth. Lightweight insulation. Now that's something that really reduces fatigue, and that can directly affect your chances of survival. If you're putting together cold weather kits these days, you'll want to prioritize materials that keep their loft even when compressed, and still insulate when they get damp, just like Kapok used to do. So, if you're building a bug-out kit or a winter emergency pack, try to think like a World War II quartermaster. Instead of lugging around several heavy blankets, go for layered insulation that traps air efficiently. That approach can make all the difference, really. Modern equivalents inspired by Kapok include, hollow core fibre fills and treated natural fibres. For sleeping systems, it's best to prioritize liners and pads that block heat loss to the ground, because, Kapok was often used under the body, not just over it. Even improvisation matters. Stuffing clothing with dry plant fibres or grass works on the same trapped air principle Kapok perfected. Kapok reminds us that survival isn't about brand names or price tags. It's about understanding physics, environment, and human limits. World War II forced rapid innovation under brutal conditions. And, some of those solutions were quietly abandoned despite their effectiveness. Serious historians and survivalists should study what worked, not just what's marketed today. That's really the real takeaway from Kapok's wartime success. Kapok outperformed blankets not because it was magical, but because it respected fundamental survival truths. Stay dry, trap air, reduce weight, and preserve energy. Those rules haven't changed. Whether you're studying history or preparing for the future, the past still has lessons worth carrying forward. If this kind of deep, practical history matters to you, subscribe to The Prepper Historian, share this with someone who takes survival seriously, and, keep these forgotten lessons alive.